This video is a little bit late because in all honesty, I just wasn't really that excited to film it. To be really upfront, my transition's going really well and I'm really happy with it. It's just that being in a pandemic for over a year now has really changed my interaction or lessened my interaction with other people and changed my relationship with my own transition to a certain extent. These days, I'm rarely confronted with how other people see me. Generally, I'm interacting in the digital sphere where it's really easy to be very clear about my name, pronouns, identity in general, or I'm interacting with people who I already know really well. And in both cases, I just have a lot more control over how people see me than I generally have in the past. Of course, that isn't to say that I haven't interacted with strangers in the past year. I have, and that's led to some interesting situations. For example, I've found that for almost in fact, I believe every single phone conversation I've had in the last year, strangers have assumed that I'm a man, even after reading my birth name, which I find really interesting. I mean, that clearly indicates that my voice, and perhaps even my way of speaking, has changed over the course of my transition to be perceived as more masculine. On the other hand, whether I'm read as a man or a woman in public seems to really depend very heavily on things like how I'm dressed and if I'm wearing a mask or not. The visible facial hair really tips the scales on that one when I'm maskless. Some really great things have come out of this time. For me, and seemingly for a lot of other people, this has been a really great opportunity to reevaluate my gender and my relationship with my transition and reflect on what I'm doing because it's very important to me and what I've done for more social reasons. I've overall had fewer moments of dysphoria and more of euphoria. Whether this is because of where I am in my transition or because of the lack of interaction with other people, I can't really say for sure. Probably it's a little bit of both. Before I go on, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of what physical changes have happened in the past little more than half a year since I've updated. The most obvious is my facial hair has continued to fill in, my voice has continued to drop, I am slightly taller, which is really quite unusual for people who started testosterone as late as I did. Beyond that, my chest has healed up really quite spectacularly after my top surgery. That's not purely testosterone related, but worth mentioning as far as transition goes. Other than that, it's mainly been maintenance, keeping up to the changes that have happened so far. Getting away from the physical, how have my thoughts about my transition changed over the past 6 months, and really over the course of the pandemic more generally? Some things that were very important to me in my more public life have completely fallen to the side in my more private experience. For example, I used to pack, not really every day, but really quite frequently, and it was a very euphoric experience for me. Since, however, I've been spending most of my time at home, I have bothered to pack maybe once in the past year. It just hasn't been super important to myself when I'm not being actively perceived by other people. I've also dropped a lot of aspects of my presentation that I would really characterize as performance. I don't think so actively about altering the pitch or cadence of my voice to sound more masculine. I don't think nearly as much about body language or how I hold myself. Not to say that these aren't, valid and important things to think about, they just haven't been vital to me in my existence as a more solitary person. In the past, when I have had more interactions in public, those have been very vital for giving me some control over my dysphoria and also for providing me with some of the safety that comes with passing, as much as that is a problematic idea. On the other hand, I have had some free time in this past year to experiment more with presentation. I've completely retooled my wardrobe so that I only have clothes that fit and that I like and am happy wearing. That's been quite a affirming process. I've also played with my haircut a little bit, though it's still pretty much the same as it has been. I've also, in relation to things outside just the realm of appearance, played around with pronouns a little bit and other terminology, and it's been a very freeing experience to get to do both of those things out of the public eye to a certain extent. I've also had the opportunity to set some priorities for myself for what's important going forward in my transition. For example, I know for sure that at this point I would like to continue to be on testosterone. The changes that come with it are things that I'd like to further or maintain, and it's something that I'm really doing purely for myself that doesn't tie into the public perception and performance of gender, but just into how I'm comfortable existing in my body. I've also confirmed that a hysterectomy is something I'd like to pursue as soon as is feasible. Originally, I was intending to get one done back in April of 2020, but when it was canceled for pandemic reasons, I wasn't certain how pressing of an issue it was to try to figure out how to get that rescheduled. But since I've had this time to reflect and think about how I'm going to be most comfortable in my body, I have realized that that's something that I really would like to happen ideally within this next year, but otherwise as soon as possible. On the other side of the spectrum, I've found that some issues such as my legal name change and legal gender change, while things that are definitely ultimately going to be important in my transition, are things that I would be fine with and comfortable with putting off for a year or two as is necessary and convenient. Obviously, all that paperwork isn't really things that I can get started now with our current situation, at least not very easily. So it's things that will have to wait anyway. And I'm not really bothered by that. All of these are things that will probably continue to shift with time. That's where I stand on these issues at the moment. Feel free to ask questions in the comments if you have any, and I'll try to get back to you, or subscribe for future updates.